In the beginning of this month, Israel bombed the Iranian consulate in the Syrian capital Damascus. This airstrike killed two senior IRGC generals in addition to a number of other people. In response to this attack, Iran bombed numerous targets within Israel using a variety of weapons such as ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, as well as drones. In response to the Iranian attack, or in response to the Iranian retaliation, Israel launched an airstrike on targets within Iran itself, and it struck at least one military installation within Iran from outside of Iranian airspace. So that's where we are right now. There is the situation. What's going to happen next? Are we going to see a major local war, or have the chances of that receded actually? And are we going to see the beginning of a larger global conflict, or have the chances for that also receded? Please subscribe and let's find out, let's analyze the situation. Before we proceed, let's talk about UPSC, India's toughest exam, aspired to by millions every year. Many dream of becoming IAS, IPS, IFS officers through this exam, where a single signature can impact countless lives. Well, I have some amazing news for all of you UPSC aspirants. On the 28th of April, 1 p.m., Unacademy's UPSC Unstoppables YouTube channel will host this year's biggest event for UPSC. It's called Unacademy Manzil 2024. This event will feature UPSC toppers like AIR2 Animesh Pradhan. It will feature top Indian UPSC educators such as Mrunal Patel sir. It will feature inspiring personalities like Sandeep Bhaiya, and your own Vijender sir will also be attending. I am going to personally attend this event, and Unacademy has planned two big surprises for you. Firstly, this event gives you the chance to receive guidance directly from top rankers and some of India's best educators. And secondly, in this event, there will be an iconic game show in which you can participate directly from home. Any UPSC aspirant or student should not miss this event. You can watch it from your home on the 28th of April, this Sunday, between 1 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. on the Unacademy UPSC Unstoppables YouTube channel. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Please go to the video, click on notify me, and like the video. Now, to understand the Iran-Israel relationship, we have to understand the fact that there is a significant amount of historical hostility between the two nations. And this dates back to 1979, when the Islamic revolution took place in Iran and the current theocratic political system came to power in Iran, and Iran became an Islamic republic. And from that day onwards, the government of Iran has held the view that Israel does not have the right to exist. They believe that Israel should be removed from the map of the world. And when you have such an attitude, there's going to be a significant amount of hostility between the two nations. So that is the background picture. Now, what has happened is this. On October 7 last year, 2023, there was a significant, massive terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel from Gaza. Now, Hamas is believed to be a proxy of Iran. In response to this terrorist attack, Israel launched a significant military operation in Gaza, and that was the beginning of the currently ongoing Israel-Hamas war. On the 1st of April this year, 2024, Israel launched an airstrike on the Iranian consulate in Syria, in Damascus, in the city of Damascus. And this killed, like I said, a couple of Iranian generals and a number of other people. Iran responded by launching a multi-layered strike on various targets within Israel. They first launched a large number of drones, and then they launched ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, and they timed this, they coordinated these attacks to arrive in Israel reasonably simultaneously. But they also timed the attacks in such a manner that the Israelis could see this coming. And as a consequence, most of these drones, most of these cruise and ballistic missiles were intercepted and neutralized. Some of these were neutralized by the Saudi Arabians. Some of them were neutralized by the Jordanians, and the rest were neutralized by the Israeli Iron Dome air defense system. And some of these missiles and drones did indeed hit their targets, but very few of those actually succeeded in doing so. So this was the Iranian retaliation to the attack by Israel, and this happened on the 13th of April. A few days later, on the 19th of April, there was an Israeli retaliation. The Israelis launched an airstrike. They launched missiles from airplanes outside of Iranian airspace, and the missiles are believed to have hit at least one Iranian military installation, although the Iranians claim that there was no significant damage. So the Iranian retaliation on Israel which happened on the 13th of April, did not cause a lot of damage in Israel. Nothing significant, apparently. And the ensuing Israeli response and retaliation also apparently did not do much damage within Iran. So it looks like the situation may actually calm down, it may simmer down. And it looks like the chances of a regional war between Iran and Israel may be diminishing. Now, what happens if there's actually a war between the two nations? So when it comes to the borders of Iran and Israel, there's an almost 1,000-kilometer distance between these two nations. And when it comes to the major cities of the two nations, the distance is almost 2,000 kilometers. So if the two nations were to go to war, they would have to engage in long distance warfare, either through missiles and rockets or through fighter planes. Now, when it comes to missiles and drones, the Iranians seem to have the upper hand. They have a significant stockpile of drones and missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and so on. When it comes to fighter planes, the Israelis clearly have the upper hand because the Iranians, they use almost obsolete fighter planes, whereas the Israelis have the F-35 and other more modern fighter planes. But any warfare that would happen would have to be long distance warfare. So it doesn't really make sense for the two nations to fight, and it's not really possible for the two nations to actually engage in warfare unless they do it through proxies. So the Iranians have various proxies such as Hezbollah, such as Hamas, such as various proxies within Iraq, such as the Houthis and so on. And the Israelis have a number of proxies when it comes to the various American military bases in the region. So that is the kind of warfare that could happen, warfare through proxy. Now, if the Americans do get involved, then that's a significant escalation, and that could lead to significant hostilities, and it could also lead to the closure of the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of the world's petrochemical energy flows, which would be a disaster for the global economy. So that's what an Iran-Israel war would look like. But right now, the way things are, it looks like the chances of a significant regional war in West Asia seem to have receded. A hot war may have been averted, but it doesn't mean that things will go back to normal anytime soon between Iran and Israel. These two nations could probably continue reprisals against each other, but through asymmetric means, either through proxies or through cyber attacks and so on. So it looks like the chances of a significant regional war have receded. But what about the chances of a major global war, what people call World War III? What are the chances of that? Have those also receded? So first of all, let's understand, what do we mean by a major global war? What do we mean by World War III? Take a look at this chart. This is the Chavda index that I'm going to be releasing soon. The US is the world's most powerful nation. It has a hard power score of 93.32. Russia comes second at 54.25. China is a distant third with 15.23, and India is a much more distant fourth at 4.21 on the hard power index. So the US is the only superpower, and it is a superpower because of two reasons. First of all, it controls the entire global economic and financial system. And secondly, it has unmatched, unparalleled global power projection capabilities. And Russia lacks these two factors, and so does China, and so does India. That's why the US is the only superpower. Russia is a near superpower. Russia's major advantage is its massive nuclear weapons arsenal. China is a great power, but it's far behind Russia in terms of hard power. And India is an emerging or a rising middle power. So that's the situation. These are the top four powers in the world. So any global conflict or any major war, major world war, would need to involve the top two powers, which is the US and Russia. So a war in which these two powers go head to head directly against each other, only such a war can be called a world war. So based on that, you will see that even if the US and China go to war, the US is guaranteed to win more or less. And it's not really a world war unless Russia also gets involved. So that's the deal. And when the US and Russia, one hopes it doesn't happen, but if they go to war, then their proxies will also get involved. And there are major proxies that both nations have. When it comes to the US, they have global power projection capabilities, and their proxies include NATO, the European Union, Israel, Japan, South Korea, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and many more nations. When it comes to Russia and China, which seem to be operating kind of together in a quasi alliance mode right now, they also have a number of proxies, such as Iran's proxies in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon. They also have the Houthis, they also have North Korea, and they also have Pakistan. And Pakistan is playing this dual role. It has its feet in both the boats, the American boat as well as the Russian-Chinese boat. More Chinese than Russian because it's a mercenary nation. So when two major powers, when the top two powers go to war, then a large number of proxies also get involved. And that's what we call a world war. That's something we saw during the First World War as well as the Second World War. So that's what a global war, a world war would involve. A clash, a direct clash between the US and Russia. Not the US and China. It's a clash between the US and Russia. That's a global war. That's a world war. And the reason for this is very simple. These two nations, the US and Russia, are the top two powers in terms of hard power. And they are the only two nations in the world that can single-handedly destroy the entire world using nuclear weapons. So the US has enough nuclear weapons to, on its own, destroy the world. And the Russians have even more nuclear warheads than the Americans. The Chinese are a distant third when it comes to the number of nuclear warheads. So that's why it's only a war between the Russians and the Americans that can be called a world war. Now that we understand this, where could such a war break out? What are the major flashpoints? Let's first talk about Europe. In Europe, historically, one thinks of the UK, France, and Germany as the belligerents. Well, today, the Germans and the French aren't going to go to war. It's not going to happen. They are both subsidiary to the US, part of NATO and part of the EU. So the only real flashpoint right now in Europe is Ukraine. And there's a conflict going on there, but the Russians have the upper hand. Whether you agree or not, the Russians have the upper hand. They control about a fifth or a fourth of the entire nation of Ukraine. And at the end of the day, whenever the conflict ends, it's going to end on Russia's terms, and Ukraine is going to be essentially partitioned. So the Russians are winning Ukraine slowly. So why is it a flashpoint? It's a flashpoint if NATO gets involved directly with NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. Now, NATO is not the US. So if NATO and Russia fight, it's a significant escalation on the chain of escalation, but it's not yet a direct confrontation between the US and Russia. There may be US soldiers that are part of NATO, but they come under the NATO command, not under the US command. So it's a significant escalation, but it's not yet World War III. But it's a significant escalation. So Ukraine is a flashpoint, especially if NATO gets involved directly. Right now, it's a proxy war, and Ukraine is a proxy. So that's one flashpoint. The other flashpoints in Europe, potential flashpoints, are Transnistria and Kaliningrad. So if somebody gets the brilliant idea from NATO's side to liberate Kaliningrad from Russia, that could be a significant escalation. And if someone from Russia gets the brilliant idea of trying to liberate Transnistria from Moldova, well, that could be a significant escalation that could ratchet tensions up and possibly lead us closer to a major war. So that's about Europe. What about Asia? Well, the usual suspects, India and Pakistan. What if India and Pakistan go to war? Well, India is going to win. Even if nuclear weapons are involved, which we hope never are, but if they are involved, then India will take some damage in this hypothetical scenario, but Pakistan will cease to exist. So India and Pakistan, the outcome is pretty much certain, and no world powers like Russia and the US would get involved. So that's a flashpoint for a nuclear war, potential nuclear war, but it's not a World War III flashpoint. What if China gets involved and comes to the aid of Pakistan? Well, by the time Pakistan will have ceased to exist, but if India and China go to war, once again, I'm not going to talk about the outcome of the war. The shorter the war is, the more advantage India has. The longer the war is, the more advantage China has. But if India and China go to war, will the major powers, the US and Russia, get involved? Well, from Russia's perspective, they would want India and China to maintain some kind of status quo. They don't want China to get too weak. They don't want India to become too weak. They would want the status quo between India and China to continue. So the Russians would actually try to end the war through diplomacy or compromise. And they certainly would not get involved militarily, the Russians. So Russia doesn't get involved. What about the US? The US may try to indirectly aid India with the objective of weakening China, but the Americans also will not get involved. So you will not see a US-Russia confrontation if India and China go to war. So once again, India and China, it's a flashpoint. It's a nuclear flashpoint, but it's not a World War III flashpoint. What about the South China Sea? Well, Taiwan is a flashpoint in which the US could get involved directly with China if China tries to take back Taiwan. Will Russia get involved in this matter is the main question, and probably Russia won't get involved in this. Russia is a very powerful defensive power, but Russia does not have the power projection capabilities to intervene in the South China Sea. So once again, not really a World War III flashpoint, but a major war for sure between the US and China. And the US will win that war, believe it or not. So that's about the South China Sea and Taiwan. What about East Asia? So you have the North Korea, South Korea situation. You have Japan and China, which have a territorial dispute. And you have Japan and Russia, which have a territorial dispute. Japan is a US fortress. So the US has more than 130 permanent military bases on Japanese soil. So that brings the US face to face with Russia as well as China. Now, I don't see Russia going to war with Japan. I don't see Japan going to war with China unless somebody miscalculates very badly and does something stupid. So a dangerous place, three dangerous, powerful nations kind of face to face, but the situation seems to be under control. North Korea looks like a crazy nation run by a crazy dictator, but actually, it's a pretty stable nation and it's a Chinese proxy. And South Korea, once again, just like Japan, is a US fortress, a large number of US military bases there. So North Korea, South Korea are proxies of China and the US. Pretty dangerous situation over here, but overall it's stable despite the occasional saber rattling by Kim Jong-un. So that's the overview of the global balance of power and the global flashpoints. The real danger of conflict between the US and Russia lies in Ukraine. It lies in Europe, either Kaliningrad or Transnistria, where there's a situation where NATO or the EU or the US directly may end up fighting against Russia, which is, well, very dangerous. The other flashpoint, potential flashpoint where major powers could get involved is Taiwan, although Russia's involvement is very unlikely, and also the Korean Peninsula. Once again, Russia is not very far from there, but Russian involvement may be unlikely there as well. So the most dangerous place seems to be Europe right now, especially if somebody miscalculates in Ukraine and some smart, brilliant person from NATO decides to put NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine. So that's the situation right now. Overall, the possibility of a major global conflict currently is low the way the situation exists right now. And it will continue to be reasonably low unless somebody tries to drastically alter the balance of power in one of the regions that is a global flashpoint. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tune in to this year's biggest event for UPSC, Unacademy Manzil 2024 on the Unacademy UPSC Unstoppables YouTube channel this Sunday, the 28th of April at 1 p.m. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Thank you for watching. See you next time.